What is the study of cymatics?
Cymatics is the study of visible sound made visible, but the reality is that sound waves don't actually exist.
Yeah, it is really fascinating.
You know, the way that nature works with sound, all audible sounds are spherical. When that encounters a membrane, it imprints a pattern of energy on that membrane automatically. Every part of your body has a membrane, like every cell in your body, and there are trillions of cells.
Amazing. John, thank you so much for being here. John, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to have you and can't wait to dive into this topic of cymatics.
Great pleasure to be with you, John. I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, thank you. So what is the study of cymatics? What is this?
Well, cymatics is the study of visible sound made visible, or music made visible for that matter. And, you know, a lot of people would say to me, or have said to me in the past, well, we know we can do that. We have lots of instruments where we can make sound visible, like an oscilloscope or, you know, spectrum analysis or whatever. But, you know, these are graphs. They're not how sound works really in space form. You know, the way that nature works with sound, you know, everyone talks about sound waves, right? But the reality is that sound waves don't actually exist. You know, if you say to someone, what's the shape of sound? They will almost certainly say, well, it's a wave. You know, that's what we've always been taught from schools, college, universities. Sound is a wave. And of course, they also talk about light waves as well, and they don't exist either in nature. So why are we using this word wave? Well, it goes back a long, long way, all the way back to Aristotle and other Greek philosophers. The essential aspect of how sound works in reality, in nature, is that all audible sounds, and I'm talking now about audibility to humans, all audible sounds are spherical in their space form. So right now I'm talking and there's a bubble of sound coming out of my mouth and a little bit out of my nose as well, so kind of a joint bubble. And that bubble is oscillating in and out with all the frequencies of my vocal folds, right? And of course at the same time it's doing that, it's expanding. But these oscillations, these in and out pulsations or oscillations you can call them, are really what the sound is. And if you graph that energy, that pulsation with an XY, you know, coordinate graph, of course you will see a wave-like action, because it is indeed a pulsation which is following what's termed the law of the sine. It's a sinusoidal mathematical law. And if you graph it and look at it, you will see what looks like a wave, but the reality is different. It's not a wave at all. Now, coming back to your original question about cymatics, when sound, in this case a bubble of sound, say from my voice as I'm speaking now, when that encounters a membrane, it imprints a pattern of energy on that membrane automatically. In fact, as I'm speaking right now, there'll be patterns on my computer screen in front of me, on my desk in front of me. All of the surfaces basically in the room are sufficiently flexible. You might think, well, how can a computer screen be flexible? But it is really. And in fact, one of the very first experiments ever conducted with cymatics, although it wasn't called that then, there was a guy, an English genius called Robert Hooke, who in the 1600s did an experiment with a glass plate, and he vibrated that glass plate with a violin bow, and sprinkling some powder on the plate, he was able to see the sound patterns for the very first time. So there's a glass plate. You might think, well, it's very strange that a glass plate can be flexible, but indeed it is. In fact, a little while later, a German musician and physicist called Ernst Chladni, he performed a similar experiment using a brass plate this time. And brass is actually even more resonant than glass. So you get beautiful patterns on the surface of a brass plate when you sprinkle on some fine powder and then you play that plate, say, with a violin bow. So this is Ernst Chladni, and from his work, we now have this term in science, Chladni figures, which are basically sound patterns, is really what they are. So the whole principle of cymatics is simply sound imprinting onto a membrane. Now, in my case, I'm the inventor of the Cymascope instrument, using this word cymatics, and then scope, like microscope or telescope. And indeed, the Cymascope instrument is showing us a realm that was previously invisible. If you think of the realm of the microscope, for example, microscopic realm, what did we know about the microscopic realm before the invention of the microscope? Well, actually nothing, nothing. No one even suspected that there was such a realm. And what do we know about the realm of the cosmos, the universe, without the telescope? Well, again, very, very little, actually. People had seen these what they thought of as wandering stars, in other words, the planets, and they had mapped all of the constellations and so on. But really, humans had very little knowledge about the universe before the age of the telescope. And it's a similar sort of situation with sound in relation to the Cymascope, because when you see sound made visible, not as a graph, but really as it would appear if your eyes could actually see it all around us, it is very, very beautiful. These patterns are geometric, they're always very symmetrical and just, very, very beautiful. So if you see music made visible, for example, wow, it is spectacular. And we have an app right now. We have the Cymascope app, as well as the instrument. We have a Cymascope app. And for a few dollars, you can literally see sound around you. Any sound can be made visible with the Cymascope app. But coming back to the Cymascope instrument itself, John, how that works is we're not talking about a glass plate or a brass plate anymore. What we're talking about is the surface of water, pure water, and the purer the better. And so if you think about the surface of water, it's extremely sensitive. It's super sensitive to vibration. So we're using that principle of nature to imprint sound onto this beautiful surface of pure water. And because sound is spherical, we make it visible in the Cymascope in a circular configuration. So we're using what's termed a fused quartz cuvette, which is a little receptacle for the water, and that then we imprint the sound into that cuvette, and therefore it appears on the surface of the water. You can see it with your unaided eye, but not very well. And in order to see it really well, you need some really nice illumination and a good camera, and then the imagery is absolutely spectacular. And this, some people, when they see the Cymascope imagery, certainly on a video, they think it's computer generated, CGI or something. And in fact, it's not. It's how nature actually works. So then what is the relevance of all of this to the human condition? Well, the relevance is that every part of your body has a membrane, like every cell in your body, and there are trillions of cells, they all have membranes. So when you're immersed in a musical environment, say, and I'm now, John, I'm not talking about headphones, or earbuds, I'm talking about speaker system or live music. When your whole body is immersed in music in that way, every single cell in your body receives a beautiful cymatic pattern. Now, where is the relevance of that from a perspective of health? Well, you may not know, John, that every cell in your body has on its surface membrane what they are termed as integral membrane proteins. These are little proteins, like little antennas actually for all the world, that project from the cell membrane, the surface of the cell membrane. And this is the way, through these proteins, It's how the cell communicates with its brother and sister cells. It's how it takes in food products. It's how it excretes waste products and so on. So now you get the idea that when these cymatic patterns, these beautiful cymatic patterns, are imprinting on every cell in your body, that they are actually, because music always has phase changes, the phase is changing within music all of the time as the frequencies in the music mix and mingle. So the phase is changing. And what that means from a cymatics point of view is that the pattern on the surface of the cell is rotating. It's not stationary, it's rotating slightly and giving these little IMPs a beautiful massage. It's really like a form of sonic nutrition, I could call it. It's a way of giving energy to the cell. And you may not know that every cell in your body has its own unique song. In fact, it was called the Song of the Cell by Professor James Jimzewski of UCLA, and he was the first person in history to listen in to the sound of cells for the very first time in 2002. And he used an instrument called an atomic force microscope to literally listen in to the sound of cells. And what he found was really interesting, and that is that the sounds of cells are centered around 1000 hertz, which is is a frequency we can all hear. Of course, they're not just simple one frequency sounds, they're an array of frequencies, but all centered around 1000 hertz. And so the idea here is, that if your ears were sensitive enough, you would be able to hear the song of your own cells. Well, it's probably just as well that your ears are not sensitive enough, because it would, probably sound very noisy. So, but the reality is that every type of cell has its own unique song. So when music imprints on your body and enters into your tissues, not only do we see this cymatic pattern created on every cell membrane, and by the way, not just on cell membranes, but on all the fascia tissues, all your organ surfaces and so on. Not only that, but also, if you think of it, you're feeding frequencies into your cells that are the same frequencies as the songs of your cells. And in fact, there's a medical condition called the quiescent phase, or the G0 phase of the cell cycle, in which if you are unfortunate enough to imbibe some toxic substance, or maybe a pathogen has invaded your body, there are various ways that the cells respond to that, and sometimes they go to sleep. They go into this quiescent, or this G0 phase, where they're literally sleeping. And one of the ways that they can be awakened is through music, or sound frequencies in general, because literally those frequencies energize the cell, give it energy, sufficient energy for it to reawaken. I liken it to the kiss of the prince, the Sleeping Beauty story.
Sure. Yeah.
There, the prince comes along and kisses the princess, and she awakens, or the Sleeping Beauty awakens. And it's a similar sort of thing. The frequencies in the music can cause the cell to reawaken, in this case, to rejoin the cell cycle. So it's a fascinating subject, John.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. And the more I learn about it, the more fascinating it gets. It's like with anything, the more you learn about it, the more you realize you don't know anything, right? So,
Right.
so sound waves aren't really a wave. They don't go through time and space like this, right? They're spherical, right? So they kind of extend out in multiple dimensions. And it's interesting that your cells each have a sound, or I guess a frequency, right? So is it true to say that healthy cells sound different than the same cells when they're diseased?
They do indeed, John. In fact,
Okay.
this was a study that I embarked on with Professor Sungchul Ji of Rutgers University. Actually, this is a few years ago now, and he's now emeritus. In other words, he's kind of retired, but he's still a professor. still has that professorial status. And anyway, Sung Chul Ji and I, he worked with me in the lab here for several days on a study involving making visible the songs of healthy cells and the songs of cancer cells. And in this case, what we found was really pretty extraordinary. And it is that all the sounds from healthy cells have this beautiful symmetry. You know, if you see them, if you know what a mandala looks like, it's kind of very symmetrical and, you know, perfection basically in geometric terms. It's kind of similar to that. But of course, the difference between a mandala and a cymaglyph, which is the word that I coined many years ago simply to mean sound image, the difference is that a mandala is very much a fixed image, you know, it's a fixed drawing or geometry, whereas a cymaglyph is very, very dynamic. It's changing all of the time. It's scintillating. It's really, you know, quite gorgeous to behold. So anyway, so we discovered that the cancer cell sounds they produce very ugly, or subjectively ugly, I could say, skewed, asymmetrical, if anything, images. So there's a big difference. And the study that we conducted was ultimately published in the Water Journal, and it's a precursor really to ultimately, or certainly inspiring, the possibility of a new type of instrument that would be used by surgeons when excising a tumor from the body or from the brain. And one of the difficulties, one of the challenges that it faces a surgeon is knowing exactly where the margins of the tumor lie. You know, apparently it's not that easy to see where the tumor ends and the healthy tissue begins. And so this instrument that we have conceived would be able to give the surgeon immediate feedback. You know, he or she would be wearing a particular type of eyewear with a little video camera in it. And as they move a laser beam, manually scanning a laser beam across the tissues, they would be able to see, literally in this little screen in their eye vision, they would be able to see exactly where the pattern changes from that of a beautiful pattern, which is obviously the healthy tissue. And then as the beam enters into the cancerous tissue area, so it would become very skewed and asymmetrical, if anything, so that the surgeon would be able to know exactly which tissues to remove. So it's a very, you know, a wonderful future that lies ahead in that area.
Wow. It's interesting that a diseased cell gives you a cymaglyph that is, I guess, you know, subjectively unpleasant to look at, right? And a healthy cell gives you a cymaglyph that is pleasant to look at. And it reminds me of, I studied heart math, right? So coherent heart rhythms and uplifting emotions give you a very pleasing heart rhythm graph, whereas, you know, negative emotions give you a displeasing heart rhythm graph. So it
That's
seems like
right.
there's a little similarity.
I've seen those graphs, John. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. You know, the coherent image produces a graph which is
Yeah.
quite attractive to the eye,
Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
the incoherent rhythms are obviously all over the place. You know, very, very
Yeah.
ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the laws of cymatics because I think they're really relevant, and I'm sure you agree, just to overall health, right? And I may have this wrong, but I think it's the second law of cymatics that has to do with the water and the compression of the sound.
That's
And our
absolutely
bodies
right.
are mostly water. So
Yeah.
if sound can impact water in that way, it's logical that it will impact our body in that way. So I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit more and just maybe talk about that second law of cymatics. If I have it right, if it's not the right one, just
Yes, you
correct
do.
me. And then, yeah, go ahead and go with that.
Thank you, John. Yes, you do indeed have it right. So, you know, it's a really simple principle, and I have so far uncovered 4 laws of cymatics. But this second law that you're referring to now, it concerns the way that when sound enters into water, what happens. Now, if you think of it, sound in air is the movement of vibrations between adjacent colliding atoms or molecules. So the air is obviously a mixture of gases. There's some atoms and mostly molecules, but nevertheless, these are all atomic particles, let's call them. And when, let's say, if we're talking about the human voice, when your larynx, the vocal folds of the muscle tissues vibrate, they are passing on their movements, their vibrations, to all of the atoms and the molecules that are surrounding the air, surrounding the vocal folds rather. That bubble, that little pearl, I like to think of it as a little pearl of acoustic energy, rapidly expands out of your mouth and ultimately expands away into space, right? Carrying with it all of these modulations. So the atoms and the molecules, are now carrying all of those vibrations away into space. One of the really interesting aspects to this, by the way, before we talk a little bit more about the second law of cymatics, is that when atoms and molecules collide with each other, in this case delivering sound frequencies bouncing literally from one to the next, like a row of dominoes kind of thing, but in 3 dimensions, if you can visualize that. When that happens, there's something else that's kind of magical that happens, because whenever 2 atoms or 2 molecules collide with each other, not only do they pass on their vibrational information from one to another, but also light is created. Now, the reason this happens is because every atom and every molecule has what's termed a magnetic moment. What this means is literally a shell of magnetism around every atom and every molecule. And when you were a child and you might have played with bar magnets and you try to put 2 North Pole magnets together or 2 South Pole magnets together, they don't want to go together, do they? They kind of, right. You feel that spongy kind of feeling, where the 2 fields are just not wanting to go together. Mm-hmm. Well, it must be something like that atoms and molecules experience, if you can call it that, as they are colliding with each other. In other words, it's the magnetic fields around the atoms and molecules that are literally interacting, colliding with each other. And whenever that happens, nature creates light. In fact, you cannot have light without sound. I'll say that again. You cannot have light without sound in the universe and on Earth, and anywhere, basically, right? So sound gives birth to light, and this works simply because the vibrations of the atoms and molecules that are carrying the sound vibrations, as they are colliding and bumping into their neighbors, not only are they passing on their vibrations, but also they're creating light. And one of the simple proofs of this, if you like, is to simply rub your hands together very, very vigorously. And as you do so, you hear a little sound, of course, of the friction between your 2 surfaces of your skin as they are passing each other. But you hear that sound, but at the same time, you feel warmth, don't you? Yeah. And the more vigorously you move your hands together, then the more warmth you're creating. And this is because all of the trillions and trillions of molecules in the skin of your hands, as they slip past each other, now if you think of these magnetic shells that are all passing each other and slipping past each other and colliding with each other, that's what's creating the light. In this case, the light is infrared light. So whenever you have sound, you have to have light created at the same time. And one of the wonderful, well, you could say almost magical aspects to this aspect of nature, is that the light that's created is modulated by the sound frequencies. And this is very, very important when it comes to sound therapy and music medicine, which are aspects of frequency medicine that is going to be huge in the world eventually. It started already and it's really taking a hold, but eventually it will move into mainstream. And this principle of sound giving birth to light will become, I predict, I prophesy, will become very, very important. Now let's come back to the second law of cymatics.
Right.
When sound enters into water, it is immediately compressed in a ratio of 829 to 1. Why is that? Well, it's because the distance between the molecules and atoms in the air is a certain distance apart. They're quite a long way apart, actually. But when the sounds enter into water, they're now entering an environment in which the molecules in the water are 829 times closer together. This means that the wavelengths, so-called wavelengths, are not really waves at all, but nevertheless, we are stuck with this term wavelength. The wavelengths of any sound, as they enter into water, are compressed in that 829 to 1 ratio automatically, right? So where this becomes really interesting from a perspective of your eyes, it actually becomes interesting from the perspective of your whole body, because if you think about it, your body is, a very high percentage of water, but your eyes are literally filled with water. It's a type of water. And so now if you get this idea that particularly with your open eyes, but it actually works even if your eyes are closed, but if you think of your eyes being open, the sound frequency, say from a speaker system or from live music, enters literally into your eyes, where the wavelengths are automatically compressed in this ratio, and then the sounds travel straight through the eyeball to the retina. The retina is a form of liquid crystal, which is very high percentage of water. So the eyeball itself is literally, well, almost pure water, has a little bit of protein content, but the liquid crystal retina is very high percentage of water. The sounds, these compressed wavelengths, then move through the retina straight into the optic nerve, which is also optic nerves, which are also liquid crystal, forms of liquid crystal, and again, very high percentage of water. So now you get the idea that all these beautiful musical frequencies travel straight through your eyes, straight along the optic nerves, direct into your brain. And there's a connection now with the pineal gland. They're not literally directly connected to the pineal, but they are indirectly connected to the pineal through the hypothalamus. And what this basically, by the way, the pineal gland, well, the hypothalamus is again very high percentage of water, as is the pineal gland. In fact, the pineal gland, which looks a little bit like a pine cone, hence its name, is sitting in a beautiful little sphere of water. So now you get the idea that you can excite what is termed, or has been termed in the past, as your third eye, which is the pineal gland. And the pineal gland, as you probably know, has been linked with our spiritual nature. So this is why, Indian sages who have been focused on exciting the third eye, this is why they have talked about improving our connection with the divine through sound. So this is kind of getting into the spiritual realm now.
Yeah,
But the reality is that sound, sound and musical frequencies in general have huge therapeutic powers in the body. And, I could talk about this subject if you wish, because we've just recently completed a study on the effects of music on human blood.
I'd love to hear about that. But before you talk about that, just real quickly, is there a specific frequency to stimulate or activate the pineal gland?
There is actually, and it's E3 if you think about it on a piano or any musical instrument. It's
So
E3.
third octave of the note E?
Yeah, the third octave of the note E, and that's
How many
about
hertz is that?
165 hertz, thereabouts.
Okay.
close to,
Okay.
depending on your concert pitch, but it's about
Yeah.
1.65. So it's quite
All right.
a low note. But then you have
Yeah.
to remember that as it enters into the water of the eyes and so on, it becomes compressed. And when it becomes compressed, then that wavelength fits exactly with the dimensions, the real dimensions of the pineal gland. And that's why that particular frequency or musical pitch is so important, because it actually resonates literally directly with the pineal gland dimensions. Therefore, the pineal gland is able to absorb that energy very readily, as opposed to any other frequency, where it's not, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be, it's not going to receive some energy. It will at any
Right.
other frequency, but not optimally. If we want optimal resonance, then we have to use E3 or 165. I don't know if you can
Okay.
hear that phone in the background, but if you do, just please ignore it, because I'm
We could edit it
obviously
out. Yeah.
going to have to.
No worries. So if you listen to 165 for the specific purpose of pineal gland stimulation, is it, so it sounds like it's better just to have it in the room and not necessarily on headphones. Is that accurate?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you
Yeah.
wouldn't headphones. There are. I can talk to you about headphone healing, which is a totally different subject, and a different. It excites a different aspect of the physiology. In fact,
Mhm.
I think we should really talk about that, because that is very important. But in the case of what we're talking about here, which is the pineal gland activation through sound, it has to be full body immersion, from a speaker system or from a live musical instrument such as a
Mhm.
guitar
Okay.
or a piano or any other musical instrument, a harp, whatever, any
Yeah.
other musical
Okay.
instrument. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So yeah, tell us now about your research with sound and blood. I find that really fascinating.
I'd love to share that. And also, if we have got time, I would love to also mention about the headphone healing, because that's
Yeah. No,
another very important subject.
I'd love to
First of
hear that.
all, relating to music and blood, well, I think it's probably fairly common knowledge that Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras of Samos, about 500 BCE, said that music could be used in place of medicine. So we're talking about 2,500 years ago here. That
Yeah.
he said that. And one of his biographers wrote that down. Iamblichus, the guy who's called, he wrote that down. And so it's come down to us, across all of those centuries, millennia, in fact. And so I came to realize a few years ago that very little research had been conducted into the biological effects of music on the human condition. And there's quite a significant body of evidence that music does have powerful therapeutic effects, but the literature doesn't really get into the nitty gritty of the effect direct on the cells. It's more of a systemic effect that it has. That has been studied in the past. So I dreamed up this experiment in order to test the effect of musical frequencies on human blood, literally on red blood cells in particular. In fact, the initial study that we started 7 years ago now, 2018, was all focused on red blood cells. I'll put it in a nutshell for you and for everyone that's listening or watching. The sounds that enter into your blood have a direct impact on the viability, what's termed the viability of red blood cells. This term viability means the ratio of dead red blood cells to living red blood cells. So I need to give a caveat here that we're not talking about bringing dead red blood cells back to life. You can't bring the
Right.
dead back to life. But in your bloodstream, and indeed, in a test tube of red blood cells, which is the way that we worked in the experiments, there are always going to be enormous numbers of red blood cells that are alive and well, thank you very much. There's also going to be an enormous number that are dead, and they are going to be in your body. They're going to be mopped up, obviously, by your body's systems and replaced. Your red blood cells are being replaced constantly. But there's also going to be another huge number that are old. They're literally, that's how they are classified medically. They're just simply old. And what that means, if you were to look at one under a microscope, you would see that that beautiful shape of the red blood cell, that little dimpled, beautiful shape, is starting to break up. It's starting to lose its beauty and its integrity. So that membrane that encloses the red blood cell, cytoplasm, it's no longer so pretty. It's starting to break up. Well, in the experiments that I conducted with the help of Professor Sung Chul Ji, the same guy, that we worked on with the music, the making visible the sounds of healthy cells and cancer cells, we worked together to devise a protocol for this new experiment on human blood. And what we found in a nutshell is that all of the music we tested created a significant increase in the viability, this ratio of dead to living red blood cells, within 20 minutes. So that was the protocol that we arranged. So we have a little test tube of blood that's literally in an incubator receiving music from a speaker, literally with the speaker in the incubator. And we also have a control vial of blood that's outside of that area in what we term the Faraday cage, which is a very quiet room, a little room within the lab here. That's the control experiment. So we measure the viability of the red blood cells in the control, and then we measure them in the musical incubator after 20 minutes of immersion, and then we compare the two. Now, to compare the two, we use a system involving a stain, and it's called trypan blue stain. And the reason we use this stain, mixing it with the blood after it's been diluted, after the blood's been diluted, we use this stain. And what happens is that any old red blood cell that's not pretty anymore, it's lost its integrity, its beautiful outer membrane is starting to break up, the trypan blue stain will easily enter that old red blood cell. And it will certainly also easily enter any dead red blood cell, but it will not enter, it cannot penetrate a healthy red blood cell. And so this is the method used to count how many are literally alive and well, and how many are dead, or they literally won't be, not necessarily everyone will be dead. Some of them that have the stain will be old, they'll simply be old, right? So what happens is, in the 20 minutes of immersion in the musical frequencies, these old red blood cells are made new again. Literally, the outer membranes where they were all raggedy and starting to break up and can easily be penetrated by the stain, now, after only 20 minutes, they have been, let's say, made sufficiently new again that the stain will not penetrate when we do the counting. So this is how the ratio can change very quickly from a very, very poor ratio to a very good one, simply by the addition of musical frequencies. And what we found, which was absolutely fascinating, John, I'm sure all of your viewers and listeners are going to find equally fascinating, is that the type of music that provided the poorest result still a pretty good result, but nowhere near as good as what we then found. Classical music provided the poorest result. And that was really counterintuitive. We both thought that classical music would probably provide the best result, but no, indeed it didn't. In fact, it provided the clue by which we ultimately came to understand the mechanism of healing, how it is that those red blood cells are healed within 20 minutes. And the connection here came, or the clue, let's say, came from the pop music. So when we immersed the blood in any pop music, then the viability shot up to much higher levels than with the classical.
Wow.
And we came to realize, after scratching our heads for a while, that it was the low frequencies in the pop music, the boom, 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 of the bass beat, that was literally causing, that had a sufficient energy to cause the oxygen that's already dissolved in the blood to bind to the hemoglobin molecules in the red
Ah,
cells and
hmm,
to help repair, help regenerate the proteins that
hmm.
would then, prevent the trypan blue stain from entering.
Interesting.
And it is interesting because when you think about it, in your vascular system, your heart, of course, its primary role, we all
Yeah.
know, is a pump, right? It's pumping the blood around, circulating the blood around
Hmm,
your body. But at the same time, who knew that it's the sound of those heartbeats, literally the low frequency pulses
hmm,
of sound throughout your vascular system, that is assisting the oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin every
hmm.
time there's a heartbeat. There's a binding, a binding, a binding with every pulse of sound. So what we were doing really with the low frequency sound from the pop music was mimicking, you could say, the heartbeats of your of
Yeah.
the body. Really quite amazing. And we've just got to the point now where this study is about to go for peer review. So, and we found, by the way, that white blood cells also respond, not such high percentage increases, I have to say, but still, even the fact that even the white blood cells are, going to gain benefit from music is a wonderful fact that we have learned from this study. I'm really excited about it.
Wow. So yeah, just bathing yourself in music has so many benefits, right? I mean, beyond what we're even talking about now, it's really fascinating. So I could, I'm imagining the people driving around with the bass, on their speakers, right? It's probably not that bad, right? And yeah, we've always thought that maybe classical music is better for some reason, but it's interesting that your research showed that no, you kind of need that low frequency beat to signal to your blood. That is fascinating.
Yeah, but there is a
Yeah.
caveat to this, John. It's very
Mhm.
important to know that the sound pressure level, the volume, if you like, of the music
The
has
decibels.
to be
Okay.
within a certain range. So let's,
Ah.
talking about decibels, which is
Hmm.
how we measure sound pressure levels, anything below 70 decibels is really not optimal for this effect because we have tested music, the effects of music on blood below 70, and there's very little effect. It still
Okay.
produces a small effect, but nowhere near. Once you get between the range of 70 and 85 decibels, that's the optimal range that we've come to call the Goldilocks zone for obvious reasons,
Okay. Yeah.
But if you go above 85, and you hear a lot of people, particularly young people, going around with their car speakers blasting,
Yeah.
that's really not good for you. In fact,
Okay.
Professor G and I did some research in that series of experiments where we took the sound pressure levels way above 90. In fact, in one of the experiments we conducted at 110 decibels, it killed all of the red blood cells within 20 minutes. Every single
Wow.
red blood cell was dead, right? So listening to very, very loud music is counterproductive from a health
Okay.
perspective. But
Yeah.
85 decibels is pretty loud. It's not a
Yeah.
quiet sound by any means.
Yeah. So
So,
can you compare it to something like 70 to 85? Is it like the roar of a crowd? Is it the beat of a like what could we relate that to?
I would just say it's getting to the point where music's starting to become uncomfortable. It's really hard to give you a
Okay.
guide here, but it's where anything, once you get to 90 and above, well, I'm referring here to perhaps middle-aged people and older people like myself. It
Yeah.
starts to become actually painful. Any
Okay.
sounds above 90, perhaps young people can tolerate those sound levels with less, obvious pain or anything. They
Right.
probably
Okay.
won't experience pain, but nevertheless, 85 is anyone would say that's a loud sound. So the
Okay.
body can take that loud sound and actually use it to good effect. But once you get to 90 and above, then you're starting into the area of pain where your ears will literally feel pain, and
Okay.
also just discomfort,
Yeah.
stress, discomfort.
Okay.
But then think about every cell in your body and how it is experiencing that sound pressure level, right?
Hmm.
Particularly the lower energies that penetrate deeply into your tissues. Every cell in your body is going to be stressed as a result of that. So anyway, coming back to the Goldilocks zone, 70 to 85, that's really the optimal area where, not too quiet, not too loud, just right. And
Hmm.
then that's very, very healing for the body. But
Yeah. Of
if we can talk, if we manage to talk, if we've got enough time, John, now to talk a little
course.
bit about headphone healing.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I'd love to talk about that because yeah, headphones and earbuds, they're rampant, right? Everybody uses them. So I'd love to hear more of your perspective on that.
Well, this is an area where, I'm really very, very excited. But I tell you what, before we go into that, I just remembered, just to finish off with the music blood,
Yeah.
that those experiments with human blood, and I told you that the peer review process is going to start very soon on this paper that we have written. The reason I'm so excited about that is because what we see for the future here are hospital beds that actually contain low frequency tactile transducers so
Hmm.
that the sound frequencies can enter into a patient's body. If you think of a supine patient lying
Yeah.
there in bed, one of the big challenges with patients lying like that, stationary, and not able to move very much at all, is the lymph in their bodies, right? Lymph is it
Hmm.
becomes a big problem because
Yeah.
the lymph system of the body needs movement. And of course, the lymph system is the way that your body is able to deal with toxins. It flushes toxins out of your body. That's how it does it. So if you're not moving, those toxins build up, and that's not going to be a good thing for patients lying in hospital for weeks on end.
Right.
So the
Mm.
idea here is that you would have these low frequency tactile transducers built into the body of the bed, basically,
Hmm.
and there would be a bedside console that the clinician would be able to access to press a button and cause low frequency vibrations to not to be like a boring drone coming up through the body of the
Yeah.
patient, but like a wave of energy flushing up
Yeah.
and down, gradually up and down the patient's body. That would actually move automatically. It would move the lymph in the patient's
Oh.
body. But the other thing it would do is it would increase the levels of the partial pressure of oxygen in the patient's bloodstream, even without them having to do anything other than just normal breathing, basically. So
Wow.
so that's a good way to help the patient, with the
Hmm.
toxins and also more oxygen. And of course, oxygen is the key healing molecule in the body. So if you've got more oxygen, you've got more healing ability in your tissues. But coming on now to headphone healing, which is a completely different subject area, but nevertheless all related to healing. This is the area where I see an even greater future than the one that I've just described. And the reason is because there are many groups of researchers around the world, medical researchers I'm referring to, who have made the discovery that very, very low frequency sounds can stimulate the vagus nerve system optimally in the body. They have also discovered that if the vagus nerve system is optimally stimulated, then chronic inflammation can be cured.
Mm.
Cancer prognosis can be increased by about 50%, 50%, and many other medical conditions can be supported, even potentially diabetes and many other medical conditions. So, why does this work and how does it work? Well, the first thing to describe here, John, is that the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. When it leaves the brain stem, the base of your skull, the first places it goes to are your left and right ears. These are what's termed the pinna, the outer ear, right? If you touch your outer ear with your fingers very, very lightly, you will find that your ears are extremely sensitive to the touch. Why is that? Well, it's because the vagus nerve is literally innervating the whole of the pinna, the whole of that outer ear. But where the most of the nerve endings are concentrated is in what's termed the tragus of the ear. This is this little flap of tissue that overhangs your auditory canal, right? And where
Kind of shaped like a triangle almost, right?
yeah, that little flap. If you don't want to hear a loud sound,
Yeah.
you're trying to mitigate it, you would push on that, and that pretty much closes off your ear canal, and you can, really protect your hearing if there's a very loud sound, or maybe you don't want to hear what somebody's saying. You press on that, right, on both ears. Now, that area, that tragus area, is exquisitely sensitive, particularly on the inside, where you've got all these thousands of nerve endings from the vagus nerve. So why did nature take the vagus nerve to the pinna of the ears? It's a really interesting question, because this is nothing to do with hearing, John. The vagus nerve is not related to, it doesn't go in the brain to the auditory center, right? So it's nothing to do with hearing. The hearing center, of course, the auditory center, the nerves there, the auditory nerves, go to the cochlea, don't they? Each left and right cochlea, right? And so the sound enters through your auditory canal, goes through the fluids into your inner ear and into the cochlea, and ultimately are sensed through the auditory nerve. But I'm not talking here about the auditory nerve. I'm talking about the vagus nerve, which goes to the pinna of the ear, the outer ear, nothing to do with hearing. Why? Why did nature do that? Well, it turns out the answer is because nature wants your vagus nerve system to be optimally tuned, to be in good tuning order, right? And the way it achieves that is by exactly what I've just said. It takes the vagus nerve to your two pinnas. You can think of these like parabolic dishes, little mini parabolic dishes that are collecting sound from the environment for two reasons. One, so you can hear, but secondly, so that your vagus nerve system is doing its very best to be optimally tuned. So where would these sounds of nature come from? Well, the sounds of the wind in the trees, the sound of birdsong, the sound of the ocean waves crashing on the shore, the sounds of white water rivers, and so on. All these natural sounds that people, from millions of years ago, the early humans, would be picking up through their pinnas, helping to maintain or to optimize vagal tone. So why is it so important? Well, because the vagus nerve system literally innervates, connects with all of the major organs of the body. So it connects straight from when it leaves the pinnas of the ear, the next place it goes to, the pharynx and the larynx. And this is good news for humans. Why? Because it means that every time we speak or sing, we are helping to stimulate the vagus nerve system. So I'm getting a really good workout right now of my vagus nerve system simply by talking. So social connection with humans, chattering and get together, is actually a very good thing from many perspectives. But one of them is that it helps the vagus nerve system to be optimally tuned, okay? However, then of course from the pharynx and the larynx, it then goes on to the heart, to the lungs, to the kidneys, to every major organ, basically, even to the gut, right? All of the major organs are connected via the vagus nerve. And this is why, by the way, if someone has a break in their spinal cord, they can continue to live. It's only because the vagus nerve is supporting all of these other functions of the body, right? So you may not have motor function anymore because of the break in your spinal cord, but you will nevertheless still be able to carry on living, right? So, but coming back to the frequencies that have been discovered by researchers for optimal vagus nerve stimulation, it turns out that these are very, very low frequencies for optimal. And I'm talking now, John, 5 hertz to 10 hertz. So these
Oh, are
frequencies,
those even audible?
no, they're not audible.
Nope.
They're
Okay.
low
Okay.
frequency. Yeah, 16 is the
Yeah.
lowest frequency roughly that a human can hear.
Mm-hmm.
Other creatures, elephants and other creatures can
Yeah.
hear much lower, but humans know 16 hertz is about the cutoff. But here we're talking even lower frequencies, 5 to 10 hertz, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm going to share now that is really so important and why I'm so excited about this. Bearing in mind that optimal vagus stimulation has been discovered to be able to reverse chronic inflammation. And by the way, chronic inflammation is the root of virtually every cancer. If you have chronic inflammation in your body and it's not dealt with, ultimately it becomes cancer in the body. So it's very important to deal with chronic inflammation if you're unlucky enough to have it. And
Mm-hmm.
and there is no pharmacological substance that can be given to you by a doctor, a medic, that can fix chronic inflammation. If you have chronic inflammation, there are substances that can be used to mitigate it a little bit, but nothing's going to fix it, excepting this discovery that that not my discovery, but others have made this discovery. So you might say, well, why is it not being rolled out in the medical world? Well, it's a very good question.
I think I know the answer to that, but
Well,
yeah.
I think I know the answer to that as well. But one thing, I'm not going to go off on a incorrect political
Right,
argument
right,
here, but
right.
I will say something that I learned not so long ago that really surprised me. A fact that surprised me that was that there's a 17 year gap between evidence and practice in mainstream medicine. Yeah, 17 years, right? So
Wow.
this could be one of the reasons why we're not seeing this new modality proliferate into the medical world. I'm not sure if that's the whole reason, but certainly one of the reasons. It's a very slow process. Evidence-based medicine needs good evidence, before any major changes are made. So even though these researchers have made this amazing discovery, then it might take many more years before it becomes mainstream. However, the really exciting thing that I wanted to share about all of this is a discovery that I made myself about 2 years ago in this case, and this concerns headphone healing, what I call headphone healing. And it concerns how these extremely low frequencies, 5 to 10 hertz, can be created by some music albums. Not all, but some. And this discovery happened accidentally, like many of the best discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a friend, dear friends in musicians, Anders Holt and Kachina Miado. They're a married couple. They live in Denmark. Anders is Danish, and Kachina is German from Munich. And they're now, together, and they make the most beautiful music. And one of the albums that Annalise, my wife, and I listen to very often at breakfast time, it's called Dream of the Blue Whale. And in it, Anders, who has this gorgeous deep voice, very resonant voice, is kind of mimicking the sounds of whales. The humpback whale sounds are so beautiful, those songs. And he's mimicking those sounds. And at the same time, Kachina is playing her beautiful keyboards. And the sound is just so beautiful. And as like I say, we often listen to it at breakfast time. Well, this particular day, this thought popped into my mind. I wonder what the frequencies are that are originating, particularly from Anders' gorgeous deep voice. And so I brought the album down into the lab here and I tested it on a spectrum analyzer. And boy, was I shocked by what I saw, John, because the lowest band on the analyzer, which is the 12 hertz band, was dancing merrily up and down, right, with Anders' voice. And then there are times when Anders stops singing and Kachina's keyboards keep on playing. And even with Kachina's keyboards, there was the 12 hertz band merrily dancing up and down. I was really puzzled by this because I knew that in a recording studio, when a music track is being mastered, as they call it, all frequencies below 20 hertz are very steeply rolled off. And the reason for that is because if they weren't, speaker systems in particular just can't handle these very, very low frequencies and would cause a lot of flapping about of the speaker cone. So I knew that, and I thought, well, how is it possible that we're seeing these very low frequencies? And you have to also know that the shape of the filter curve in the analyzer is like a bell jar shape. So it means that when you see the 12 hertz band dancing up and down, that there are frequencies present down to 4 and 5 hertz. So you can imagine why I was so excited to see that. And cutting a long story short, John, I then went up into our home, because our home is literally adjacent to the lab, and brought down a whole bunch of albums and tested a lot of them. And almost all of them did not show this effect, but a very small percentage did. And so now I have created this list, and I'm calling this effect the audio heterodyne effect. Now, heterodyning is very well known in radio transmission, for example, but it's not known at all in audio. And this is a discovery, a new discovery that I made, and I'm very excited about it because although speaker systems cannot handle these extremely low frequencies, some very high quality headphones can, right? So you can probably see where I'm going with this now. If you experience music from any of these audio that have the audio heterodyne effect through good quality headphones that can reproduce frequencies down to say 5 hertz, then it means that your vagus nerve system is going to get an optimal workout just by experiencing beautiful music. So how good is that? You could put a set of headphones on, play an album, and if you were unfortunate enough to have chronic inflammation in your body, or cancer, let's say, and you want to improve your prognosis, or you want to, completely banish the chronic inflammation, you can actually do so by listening to beautiful music. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. This will take, perhaps, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks of listening before your cytokines, which are in a kind of war in your bloodstream, are going to come back into balance. Because this is what happens in chronic inflammation. The cytokines are fighting with each other and causing the inflammation. And so imagine a world in which a doctor, instead of giving you a pill to try and help you, support you with chronic inflammation or cancer prognosis, can simply loan you, let's say, a system where you've got high quality headphones, high quality headphone amplifier, and a playlist of albums that come from my audio heterodyne list. And I'm going to share that list with you, John, and you're very welcome to share it with all of your listeners so that these albums can be used by anyone in the world who has any of these medical conditions that can be helped by optimal vagal stimulation.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. So one quick question on that. So is that why, so going back to nature's design, for the pinna, to get, that's why the vagus nerve goes there. Is that why just being in nature and listening to natural sounds can also be related to healing?
Oh, I'm sure that's a large part of it. Annalise and I, we've just come back from a vacation to the Azores. It's the first time we've been to those beautiful islands in the Atlantic. And one of the benefits that we gained there was from the fact that the beach, the hotel where we were situated, was right next to a really beautiful beach, and the waves that were coming in were
Yeah.
fantastic. I've never seen waves like a bit like what you see in Hawaii, where the surfers are out there. In fact, there were
Yeah.
surfers
Yeah.
surfing these waves. Anyway, so the
Yeah.
waves were crashing on the shore, creating, of course, white noise, which is, if you ever
Yeah.
look at that on a spectrum analyzer, you'll see thousands of frequencies way up into the ultrasound ranges. So up to,
Mm.
say, I don't know, 40 to 60 kilohertz, So very, very wide band noise,
Mm-hmm.
which is very healing for your body. But
Mm-hmm.
also, in addition, and of course, think about your ears picking up all this sound and going into your
Mm-hmm.
vagus nerve system. A very wide frequency range from the 40 to 60 kilohertz way down to, well, I don't know because I never looked at it, but I imagine there will be extremely low frequencies present in
Yeah.
the sound of wave action. And then, in
Mm-hmm.
addition to that, think about all of the negative ions that are created by,
Yeah.
the wave action. So negative ions, as you probably know, are
Yeah.
extremely healing for the body because,
Mm-hmm.
our metabolic processes create situations where atoms are being stripped of their electrons, and you end up
Mm-hmm.
with atoms that are positively charged. And these are
Yeah.
terms sometimes called free radicals, and they do
Mm-hmm.
harm in the body. Now, this is a natural process. If you walk in barefoot on the sand, so on wet sand,
Grounding.
or,
Yeah.
or on soil, yeah, you would be grounded, and this effect would never happen. There'd be an inrush of electrons that would instantly neutralize all of these free radicals.
Yeah.
But because in the natural world that we live in the a modern world, I should say, we,
Mm-hmm.
we walk around with shoes on, and
We're
that's
separated.
insulating us
Yeah.
from Mother Earth. So the
Mm-hmm.
metabolic processes in our body has a chance to create these unfortunate
Mm-hmm.
free radicals which do harm. However, if you breathe in negative ions, that's one way that you will neutralize, without, even when you've got your shoes on, just
Mm-hmm.
breathing negative ions into your
Yeah.
body will neutralize all
Fascinating.
of the free radicals. And another way is by drinking structured water. I know that you wanted to talk about that. I don't know whether we have time or not, John, but structured water is another way you can neutralize free radicals in your body.
Now, is structured water, is this, I've heard of hydrogen water. Is that a type of structured water?
No, that's a different
No.
a different type
Okay.
of water. Hydrogen water devices are readily available, and there is some benefit to them because obviously creating the hydrogen water is based on the idea that your the atoms and the molecules rather in the water are going to gain electrons
Mm-hmm.
temporarily, but you have to drink that water immediately because if you
Mm-hmm.
didn't, it would just gas off. It would literally
Ah.
leave the container. So you have to drink it immediately it's being created. But no,
Mm-hmm.
structured water is an entirely different process. If you pour water into a glass, just a normal glass, you will
Mm-hmm.
see what we were all taught at school and college is the meniscus around the boundary, the
Mm-hmm.
periphery of the glass, where you see
Right.
the water starting to climb up the wall a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they never really explained that in school, at least not in high school. They also can call it, capillary attraction, but again, no explanation. Well, we now know that this is all due to electrostatic charge and literally free electrons in the
Right.
water. And this happens automatically when water meets a boundary condition, a hydrophilic boundary condition, then it literally causes this attraction, electrical attraction. And one of the discoveries that I'm, so thrilled by is by Professor Gerald Pollack of the Pollack Labs in Washington University in the US. And he and his team discovered that this type of water around the boundary of a glass, say like that, is a completely different type of water to the water in the bulk part of the glass, right? It has a different refractive index. It's kind of sticky. It's not the same as normal water. And this has happened automatically. It has changed. And what they discovered is that this type of water has an actual structure. They also discovered, and the structure, by the way, is hexagonal. If you've ever seen the hexagonal lattice of frozen water, it's very similar to that. But in this case, it's not frozen. It's just a different phase of water. In fact, they've called it the fourth phase of water. So this water, this hexagonal structure of the water, allows us to, if we drink that water, to gain free electrons. So, and one of the discoveries that they made, an amazing discovery, and again in this case happened accidentally in their lab, is that structured water is built by infrared light. So if you want to create structured water, to create more of it, then you have to use warmth, you have to use infrared light. And the way that I teach my students how to make structured water is the same way that Annalise and I do in our kitchen at home here. You take your source of water, whatever it is. I mean, obviously, the better the quality of the water, obviously that's the best quality water you can have to start with is better. But any water will do the same thing, essentially. If you take the water, and first thing is to put it into a food blender and whiz it for about 30 to 40 seconds in the food blender. And what that does is that disassociates the big water clumps. Obviously, you can't see these clumps in the water because it's all transparent, isn't it, to the eye? But in reality, all natural water, wherever it comes from, has these big clumps, sometimes called coherent domains, and they can have a million water molecules all clumped together. So by whizzing it in a food blender, you break up those clumps and you basically allow all of the water molecules to be separate from each other, so disassociate from each other. It doesn't take very long to do it, like 30, 40 seconds, it's done. Then you pour that water from the food blender into a saucepan or into a kettle, and you warm it to either blood temperature or just above blood temperature. It doesn't matter. It can even be as high as 100 degrees F or 50 degrees C. It can be quite a bit higher than blood temperature, but not too hot. And then you pour that water into a vacuum flask, glass. It has to be glass-lined vacuum flask. Put the lid on and effectively cook it overnight, right? And it takes several hours to cook it. And then the next morning, you start drinking from that vacuum flask. And whenever you're thirsty, you drink from that flask. And what you're drinking then is a very high quality structured water that will instantly eradicate any free radicals in your body. So it's very, very good quality water to drink. And also, of course, it's warm, so it can be immediately assimilated by the body. It never ceases to surprise me, John, that Americans, my wife is American, and we obviously visited America many, many times. It never ceases to surprise me when you go into a restaurant or a cafe. The first thing the staff will do is bring you some ice cold water with ice cubes in it, and this is the worst kind of water to drink. Basically, you might think it's going to refresh you, but actually warm water is far more assimilable by the body and more refreshing actually than chilled water. Your body has to warm up that ice water before it can do anything with it, right? Whereas if you drink warm water, and particularly the water I'm talking about now, which is beautiful, got all these free radical qualities, got all of these free electrons that can eradicate free radicals, then it's way better for you, than ice cold water. And so it's a wonderful discovery that Pollack Labs made, Jerry Pollack and his team made And now, thanks to Gerald Pollack, we are making and drinking this structured water in our home every day. I've lost your sound, John.
Oh, sorry about that. There we go.
There you go.
So if there's, sorry about that. Yeah, if before we sign off, I was just wondering if there's one thing you'd like people to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Well, the one thing I really would love to share before we close is the Cymascope app. I mentioned the Cymascope
I'd love, yes, I would love
right,
to see that.
right at
Yes.
the beginning.
Yeah.
So here is, this is an iPhone, but you can, the same app is available on Android platform as well. And you can see what's happening now as I'm speaking. Then the app has a very sensitive analyzer in it that's picking up my voice frequencies, and it's showing you these frequencies in cymatic mode. So these are all cymaglyphs that are automatically coming up onto the screen. Now that's in itself, there are many different aspects to this app, but the aspect of this app that I'm most excited by is if you go to the top left burger bar, as they call them, on this app,
Hmm.
you will find a whole library of articles based on music medicine and sound therapy. So these
Mm,
are all nicely referenced, so you can track back
amazing.
to the original science for all of these. And so all of those articles are free within the app. There's no extra purchases. $12 buys you this app. So it's not
Hmm.
only brilliantly clever and can help you, particularly if you're a musician, this is a really
Yeah.
clever app. But in addition to all of that, you've got this receptacle of knowledge, this library of knowledge that you can dip into
Oh,
and basically learn so much about the power of sound, frequencies, and music to support your own health and the health of your loved ones. So there you go. It's called Cymascope App, Cyma, then scope like microscope, and it's $12. So there you go.
awesome. No, that's great. I appreciate that. And the albums you mentioned earlier, are those on Spotify somewhere, or how can people access those?
No, I'll have to send you the list, John, and then you can
Okay.
distribute it, along with your podcast
Yeah.
notes.
Sure.
I'd be happy to share that. I updated it in September. It's not a huge list yet, but
Hmm.
in the months that come, I will test more and more albums. And by the way, if there's anyone that's watching or listening to this right now, and you are a musician and you have albums that you would like to have excuse me, like to have tested, then please get in touch with John. And ultimately, I'm completely open to testing albums. I want to test as many albums as possible and expand this list, and ultimately to have like a multi-genre list of audio heterodyne healing albums that people can choose from, provided, always provided that you listen to this music through really good quality headphones. And when you look at the specification of the headphones, they have to be able to start at 5 hertz, not 20
Right.
hertz, which most headphones do. 5 hertz. And there's a model that I particularly recommend. It's called Beyer Dynamics, a German brand. Beyer, Beyer Dynamic, and the model number is DT770 Pro or DT770 Pro X. Both of those models you can use, and they have this frequency response starting at 5 hertz, and they're not hugely expensive. That's why I recommend them, because you can pay $1,000 for headphones, if you're an
Hmm.
audiophile, but these are
Yeah.
high quality, and I think they're not much more than $100, something like
Oh,
that.
that's great. Amazing. Well, John, this was a really fun conversation for me because I love the science of sound, and your invention of the Cymascope has been really interesting to me since I've learned of it. If people are interested in learning more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Well, you can find far more information on our main website, which is cymascope.com,
Okay.
Cyma scope like microscope dot
Hmm.
com, and there you'll find a free resource many different subject areas where, cymatics science can be used to tease out many of the mysteries of nature. So please do visit that. And also we have a shop where, all our research is self-funded, and the shop is soundmadevisible.com. All one word, soundmadevisible.com.
Amazing. John, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate
Been a
it.
great pleasure. Thank you so much, John, for inviting me and being this wonderful platform that allows knowledge to be shared into the world. So many, many thanks. Many blessings.